What does the playoff picture look like for the Denver Broncos now that Week 14, the Denver Broncos bye week, is in the books? So, the AFC standings, they didn't change too much, but there is one game that could help the Broncos later on in terms of potential seeding, and that was the Chiefs beating the Chargers. The Chargers losing could help the Broncos a little bit later on. We'll talk about that in just a second. But outside of that, not a whole lot changed in terms of what could affect the Broncos. The Chiefs and the Bills already had playoff spots locked up heading into the week. The Bills lost and the Chiefs won. The Chiefs are now AFC West champions for the 9th consecutive season. But again, we did kind of need the Chargers to lose that game, so this win by the Chiefs does benefit the Broncos a little bit in the long term. The Steelers are right on the Bills' tail now, sitting at the number 3 seed at 10-3 after they picked up a big win over the Cleveland Browns. And with Buffalo losing, Pittsburgh could very well position themselves in for the number 2 seed as opposed to Buffalo, and that could have implications for Denver because Denver is likely going to play the number 2 seed if they remain the 7th seed. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on here, is who's going to ultimately end up with this number 2 seed. Then we've still got Pittsburgh for the time being as the number 3 seed at 10-3. The Texans, as they hold on to the lead in the AFC South, are 8-5 despite them kind of stumbling down a little bit. They were also on a bye week this week as well were the Baltimore Ravens, sitting at 8-5. They still hold on to the 5th seed. The Chargers, they are now the number 6 seed. I believe it was actually switched beforehand. Or no, it wasn't, because the Ravens had a tiebreaker over the Chargers. But either way, the Chargers, they are currently sitting at the number 6 seed at 8-5. And now Denver is tied with the Ravens and Chargers with an 8-5 record as the 7th seed. But the Ravens and Chargers have already beaten Denver this year, so they both currently hold tiebreakers. Currently, the Denver Broncos, after Week 14, have a 74% chance to make the playoffs per the New York Times formula, and it was a 74% chance as well, actually, per the NFL.com formula. So similar mathematical outcomes right there for the playoff chances. Looking at the Denver Broncos' future games, this Indianapolis Colts game is the biggest game on the Denver Broncos schedule in easily 5, 6, 7 years. Honestly, this is probably the biggest game on the Denver Broncos schedule since 2015, the Super Bowl season. This is a chance that the Denver Broncos have to basically solidify their spot right now. If the Denver Broncos win the game against Indianapolis, then their playoff chances shoot up pretty much into the mid-80s. You're feeling pretty good if you beat Indianapolis. You would need pretty much an epic collapse there at the end in order to not make the playoffs. But if you were to lose to Indianapolis, then your playoff chances drop pretty drastically. In fact, they've dropped down all the way to 36%, give or take. So obviously, winning this game is pretty much mandatory for the Denver Broncos. This is a must-win game. You can't risk your playoff chances dropping this low. You can still make the playoffs if you end up losing this game against Indianapolis, but you basically would need to win 2 out of your last 3, and one of those wins would have to come against the Cincinnati Bengals. And the Chargers would also make it a little bit more comfortable for you. So again, this is a must-win game for the Denver Broncos. They can still make the playoffs if they don't win, but it's hairy. It's really hairy. The most direct path to getting there is taking care of business. Basically, if the Denver Broncos win this game against Indianapolis, win one more game after that, and then Miami loses one game along the way, the Denver Broncos are in pretty good shape. Cincinnati is still kind of trailing you a little bit. They're still kind of sticking around, but you're not exactly worried about them as compared to teams like Miami and Indianapolis. Those are the two teams that you are really worried about. Indianapolis, you can take care of this coming week. And the Colts are going to be going into this game equally as desperate, because if they lose this game, they are basically out of the playoffs. They have to win this game as well. So it's going to all come down to which team wants it more at the end of the day in this matchup on Sunday versus the Indianapolis Colts. But if the Denver Broncos take care of that game against Indianapolis, and then they take care of business against the Chargers, and let's say that Houston beats Miami like they probably should on paper next week, Denver could have a playoff spot locked up by the end of next week. That's how good this could be for the Broncos if they end up winning against Indianapolis. But at that point, you would still have something to play for, because you'd be playing for seeding. If Denver wins out and if Baltimore loses one game along the way, then Denver could insert themselves as the number 5 seed, and they would likely play the Houston Texans or possibly the Indianapolis Colts, but they're probably not going to be in AFC South Championship contention if they lose against Denver. So you're pretty much solidified to play the Houston Texans if you can get that number 5 seed. More realistically, Denver's got a better shot at the 6th seed, and at that rate, you would probably be playing a team like either the Buffalo Bills or the Pittsburgh Steelers, depending on how that number 2 seed works out. I know that if I had to rank places I would rather go to for a possible wild card game, I think Houston would be number 1. I think Pittsburgh would be number 2, and then Buffalo would be number 3. I don't really want to have to go on the road to Buffalo because of the weather. It's probably going to be cold, windy, and snowy. I don't want to have to play football in those conditions. I think Pittsburgh, yeah, it'll be cold and windy, but probably not blizzard, lake effect, snow conditions. I think the Broncos could handle that, and then obviously Houston is indoors. So the Broncos could really set themselves nicely here if they could somehow find a way to get that 5 seed. If Baltimore loses 2 games along the way, the Broncos at that point would be basically hoping that the Baltimore-Cleveland game in Week 18 would be scheduled for the early 1 o'clock window. If it is, then the Broncos will know the outcome of that game most likely before kickoff against the Kansas City Chiefs. They could then decide at that point if they want to rest starters or not, but obviously that's a bit of a further conversation down the road. The Broncos have to focus on taking care of business this week. They can only worry about the opponent that's currently right in front of them, and that opponent right now is the Indianapolis Colts. You beat the Colts, then you're feeling pretty good about making the playoffs. You lose to the Colts, then again, you still have a chance. You're not dead, but it's very hairy. You would need to basically win 2 out of your last 3, including one of them being against Cincinnati. So, yeah, man, the Broncos need to win this game if they want to basically solidify their chances even further at making the playoffs. All right, Broncos country, be sure to leave a like on this video as well as subscribe and ring the bell so these videos appear in your notification feed. And let me know, guys, how do you feel about the Broncos' final 4 games of the schedule, and what do you think the Broncos' record is going to be in those final 4 games? Drop those comments down below, guys. I would love to hear your thoughts as always. Be sure to leave a like on this video as well as subscribe and ring the bell. And until next time, guys, I'm your host, Gage Madrid, saying peace out.